If you're not up on the latest gaming news zeitgeist, you might not have heard some uproar this last week over WB claiming a patent on the Nemesis system that has been used in Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War. Basically, it's a pretty rad game mechanic that can generate a lot of personality as well as abilities and skills to enemies, that can essentially become recurring characters in your playthrough, creating an extra layer of storytelling or unique experiences to what is essentially Assassin's Creed Mordor. It's an excellent idea, and it's done really well. In fact, on this channel we did a discussion video of game mechanics that we're surprised aren't in more games, and the first one that we all mentioned was the Nemesis system. I want to see it in more games. Just imagine a version of Ghost of Tsushima where the rogue samurai that you fight live to come back and kill you out of revenge. Except this time they have a new skill or can block your overpowered smokescreen. The long and short of it is, WB filed a patent a few years ago trying to claim ownership of the concept of the Nemesis system. And after a few years of specifically defining it in a patent, they were successfully granted one. Now, in theory, this means that nobody else can use anything like the Nemesis system in their games, preventing any sort of hope that my aforementioned system would show up in the Ghost of Tsushima. But is this exactly the truth? Theoretically, could someone else still make something adjacent to the Nemesis system? And do video game patents as a whole hurt games by not allowing more concepts and systems from appearing in other titles? Well, I've done the research, so you don't have to. And today I present to you our video game patent stifling creativity in games. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing for more content. First, let's take a step back from the Nemesis System patent specifically and look at other video game patents and how they've been used to prevent people from making games in a certain way. One of the most hated video game patents comes from Namco of all places, when they claimed the concept of placing minigames of their classic titles to distract the player while stuck in loading screens. This was a brilliant idea. Namco has a catalog of classic games, and during the PlayStation 1 era, loading screens could be a serious issue. But by filing this patent, they essentially forced other companies to not do this. And so, until we had smartphones to browse Twitter for 30 seconds, people actually had to look at a loading screen and wait. But hey, at least this patent expired in 2015, just in time for SSDs to become more mainstream and invalidate most of these loading screens. Namco also patented Tekken's tutorial, in which they showed if the player correctly did button inputs for combos on screen in real time. They're the reason you've had such a hard time learning how the hell to pull off a fatality in Mortal Kombat games. Thankfully, this patent also expired in 2017. Square Enix has patents on Final Fantasy X's Sphere Grid, and Final Fantasy Tactics Advance's Judge system, which I haven't really thought about in years, but it was a very cool concept, and I'm sad that we won't see it in more games, at least until the patent expires in 2025. And for the small but dedicated fans of Eternal Darkness Sanity's Requiem, well, yeah, they patented the concept for sanity effects related to a sanity meter. Also, really quick, why is this patent clearly a picture of Link in the Forest Temple? If you don't know about this game, while you play it and your character sees some spooky stuff, their sanity meter goes down. And depending on how low it goes, you can see some crazy stuff appear on screen, sometimes even breaking the fourth wall. Again, this is a great concept, but unfortunately as of 2021, this patent is still active, so you can't go crazy in a video game. But speaking of crazy, Sega patented directional arrows above cars in games like Crazy Taxi, and they actually sued Fox, EA, and Radical Games over Simpsons Road Rage because, well, I mean, it was a Simpsons flavored Crazy Taxi, but it was awesome. Fun fact, this Sega patent also includes the way that the AI for the NPCs makes them jump out of the way of oncoming cars. And while we're talking about patents in car games, Atari actually had the patent on ghost cars in time trials to show you your fastest lap. And for a while, they were simply charging each publisher that used them a fee to keep them in their games. And while Nintendo was ponying up to use them in their Mario Kart titles, Acclaim's 1999 racing game Revolt actually had to remove them because they didn't go through the proper channels to get the rights to use ghost cars. So clearly we've established that video game patents have some wide-reaching effects on the industry. Just imagine, if you will, what if the creator of Rogue patented a system to have procedurally generated maps and enemies? Then hey, Hades wouldn't have existed. And just think of all the cool fan art that we would have missed out on. Thankfully, it's not all gloom and doom. A lot of this stuff probably won't hold up in court. While a patent office might let you make a patent for something simple, they shouldn't, since technically there is a law preventing you from making an obvious patent. However, the US Patent Office is actually self-funded, so the more patents they issue, the more money they make. However, if you try to sue someone in court over said patent, the judge may just throw it out, because you're combining two very obvious things. Think, sure, Reese's does own the idea of a peanut butter and chocolate cup, but they don't own the rights to simply combining peanut butter and chocolate. Or for a more video game-centric analogy, you could make a turn-based game where you go on a quest to fight a dragon, but you couldn't get away with recreating a Dragon Quest game one for one. In fact, the majority of all patents are invalidated in court. Let that sink in. The majority of all patents are invalidated in court. However, the fear of going to court is still heavy. Thankfully, developers can find workarounds. For example, BioWare has had a patent on their dialogue selection wheel for years, but that doesn't mean that other games don't have dialogue options that don't look extremely similar. One of my favorite instances of a patent not holding water was when Atari tried to sue Sega over their use of side-scrolling gameplay. Yes folks, Atari tried to patent the concept of moving left to right in a 2D video game. Basically, they argued that Sega had hurt Atari's dominance in the games market because of the use of their patent, and in the process, cost them huge sums of money. Hilariously, the court argued that while technically Sega probably was infringing on their patent, they were not responsible for Atari losing millions of dollars. That was on them, which god damn, that's brutal. And some patent holders aren't too keen to enforce them. Xbox actually has a patent on scoring based upon goals achieved with subjective elements, which is basically legal jargon to say beating a level with style. They patented this in 2001 for Project Gotham Racing's Kudos system, which was basically, oh hey, you did a spin in the middle of the race, so you get more points. Which hey, y'all, that's just video games. And it seems like Xbox realized they would probably either be laughed out of court or just hated by everyone, because they haven't really cracked down on anyone for using it. And none of this is to mention hardware patents. Nintendo was the only company for years that could make cross-shaped D-pads. Just think back to the original PlayStation and Xbox controllers. Yeah, that's why they didn't have normal D-pads. Thankfully, this patent expired in 2005, so Xbox didn't have to make their D-pads look like this again. But back to the major thesis here. Are patents bad for video games? Unfortunately, it's not a black and white answer, but personally, I lean towards yes. Some of the examples I've listed have definitely made games worse over the years. The fact that we've had to stare at boring-ass loading screens for 2 decades because of Namco is absolutely infuriating to me. Conversely, however, a second Simpsons car game came out, Simpsons Hit and Run, and instead of a giant arrow pointing you where to go, the game provided a minimap, which frankly is a more exciting system in my mind, because it allows you to see multiple routes you can take and have to think on the fly instead of just blindly driving in one direction. But let's go back to the Nemesis system I mentioned at the beginning of the video and talk about that patent. And really quick, just in case it's not clear, I am not a patent lawyer. I'm just some guy who has a degree in acting and then started a YouTube channel about video games. But there is an excellent video by Hogue Law, a channel that covers legality of all things digital, and I highly recommend it if you're interested in the specifics about the Nemesis System Patent. This patent is huge and convoluted, but basically Warner Brothers argues that their Nemesis system is unique, in that what the player does through fighting or interacting or even dying against one NPC in the game can affect that NPC and even another in the game as well. Now, you don't have to have played video games for too long before you realize they didn't exactly invent the concept of this. Hell, I know it's an overstated thing to compare a game to Dark Souls, but if I kill Smo, Ornstein changes drastically, or vice versa. In fact, one of the reasons it took WB so long to get this patent is because the previous versions they had drafted were marked as too similar to Crusader Kings, a game that has a ton of NPCs and a sprawling web of interactions that can change various characters on the map. And it's important to note that if a patent tries to claim a thing that has existed within 1 year before it being claimed, then it can be thrown out. So, presumably, and that's the key word, presumably, this could be beaten in court. But like I said, the patent for this is extremely complicated, and patent judges are not exactly known for being the best at understanding software patents. So many people think it's possible that someone could design a similar system and get around it. Heck, even Assassin's Creed's mercenary system isn't too far off. But say you're a major publisher, and someone pitches you the idea of doing this. It's going to take years, and depending on your budget, cost you literally millions of dollars to develop. And you're gonna have to go in expecting a lawsuit from Warner Brothers, which will cost you more, and God forbid you lose it, because then everything you've done goes down the drain. And this is the fear that gets put into major AAA publishers. And if you're an indie developer, it's even worse. Kat Manning, who's worked on indies like Pathologic 2 and Where the Water Tastes Like Wine, tweeted about this patent saying, "I looked at the patent and it's so broad as to be absurd. Multiple other emergent narrative systems that I have seen and worked on could be described with their language. It probably would not be legally enforceable, but I and other indie devs don't have the money to find out." Basically, I don't expect anyone to try and take on Warner Brothers lawyers. And because this patent is probably going to last until 2035, unless WB makes another Lord of the Rings or Batman game or hell, even a Harry Potter game with the Nemesis system, we probably won't see it in anything else. And that is a huge problem. Except, as a huge twist in all of this, good ol' itch.io now has a Nemesis Game Jam, where developers can create games to test the boundaries of this patent and make a game with a similar style just to see how far this patent and WB are willing to go to protect it. They're out there doing God's work, and I'll include a link to this as well down below. I'm not saying there aren't some grounds for WB to want to protect their idea. It's a great idea, but it's not like the source code for making the Nemesis system is just out there in the wild. It really would take years for someone else to develop, and I guarantee you somebody else's version would come out at least slightly different. In fact, Monolith Productions, the company behind Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War, said that they were inspired to make the Nemesis system because of the Burnout series, which featured a mechanic where you were rewarded for taking out cars that had previously wrecked you. And that's not even bringing up the clear inspirations in combat from the Assassin's Creed or Batman Arkham games. But when it comes to challenging this patent, the fear of taking risks for big publishers is immense. And as I mentioned before, God forbid an indie dev team would try to tackle this as well. They wouldn't have the funding to make it happen, and even if they did, would they be able to afford the legal team to help them in court against someone like Warner Brothers? At the end of the day, this specific situation sucks. Do I think someone will be able to get around it? Yes. Do I think they'll have the huevos to try it? Maybe, maybe not. Video game patents are weird as hell things. Their existence alone seems to only benefit those with the money to apply for the patents, maintain them, and enforce them, which maybe is a sign that the system is broken. And with that statement, I'll leave you with this. Amazon's own Jeff Bezos patented the idea of having a one-click order button. Basically, a site will record your credit card and address, so you can just click buy and have something sent to you. And when he filed this patent, people were rightly pissed. But in his own defense, Bezos said if he didn't do it, then somebody else would have patented it and used it against him. He went on to say that the patent system is broken and needs reform. And if Jeff Bezos, a man who has absolutely broken the system, is gonna tell you that a system is broken, you better goddamn believe him. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed, please give it a like and consider subscribing, as it greatly helps us out a lot. And if you're interested in more stuff about gaming lawsuits, why not check out my video on how the Pokemon Kadabra was banned from the Pokemon card game and anime. Also, we have a Discord with a very active and actually pretty cool community to talk about various gaming topics. And if you have a few bucks to toss our way, we'd love it if you went over to our Patreon, where you can vote on which video essay you'd like to see us do next. But either way, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, have a wonderful day.